Morning, everyone. It's nice to be here with you this morning. Thanks to the committee for asking me to give this presentation. It's nice, too, that I have a couple of backups if I start to stutter. Nick Klein was in Mexico with us for a time, and Kendra Camps here was in Mexico with us as well. So maybe they can add their 2 cents, right, Nick?
Nope.
Nick took most of the pictures that you're going to see up here and graciously shared them with us. So let's get right to it. Our trip was July 31 to August 12. I'm titling this presentation Discoveries in Mexico. I'm going to give a list of discoveries from this trip. But first, just a brief recap of our trip last year. Last summer, we went to Mexico for the first time. And the we there is myself and Prof. Kamiga and Reverend Rodney Klein, and then some others who helped, assisted us. When we were there, we were introduced to 2 denominations and 2 seminaries and 1 congregation. The 2 denominations are 2 Presbyterian denominations, the National Presbyterian Church, which is made up of 2 million members, they say. It has a number of seminaries. The main one is in Mexico City itself, and that's pictured here, plaque for the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. And then there is the Independent Presbyterian Church, which is made up of about 30,000 members. Their seminary is also in Mexico City. It's called the John Calvin or Juan Calvino Seminary. We held a conference there last summer. And then we spent a week at a particular congregation of the National Presbyterian Church called Griess de Gracia, means Rains of Grace. And we held 2 conferences at that congregation. So that was last year. Maybe some of you saw a presentation of the trip last year. This year we were off to discover more because they asked us to come back. They wanted us to give conferences again. They gave us topics they wanted us to cover. So we went back again this summer, July 31 to August 12. We went back with the help of both First Church and the contact committee of our denomination. First PRC has taken oversight of any work that we do in Mexico, and they've also done some fundraising in order to be able to send us out there. We had a Mexican dinner where Donner and Susanna, Donner is going into our seminary here this coming semester. He's from Mexico. He's our connection to these churches. They cooked an authentic Mexican meal for everybody, had a nice fundraiser. And the contact committee gives some funds from a fund for training foreign pastors. So between the 2 of those, we're able to make this trip. Who went along? Donner is right here. Kind of hard to see, perhaps a little bit small. His wife is notoriously difficult to take pictures of. Even Nick didn't get very many. She hides a lot. But she's a sweet lady. Donner and Susanna, one of their sons is right here, Ian. And they have a daughter, Ellie, also. Samuel Vasquez from our Redlands Church. Donner and Samuel are our translators, fluent Spanish, do a very good job. None of this would be possible without them. They translate all of our speeches for us. My wife was able to go with me this time, for part of the time. Reverend Rodney Klein, Prof. Kamiga, his wife Rhonda, she was with us the whole time. Brian Pastor, also here. From First Church, he's on the Mexico committee of First Church. He went along. He also knows Spanish pretty well, did a good job. Madeline and Lydia Monsma. Some of you probably know Madeline. She graduated last year. Her sister Lydia, and then here's Kendra Camps, also went along. Those are the full-timers. Part-time, Nick Klein came along for a number of days, was very, very helpful, took a lot of pictures, a lot of recordings. He's a very generous man as well, is very helpful. And then Kendra's father, Titus Camps, came for a part of the trip as well, the last part of it. He was a joy to have around too. Very well-traveled man, adventurous man, so it was enjoyable having him. Where did we go? We went to 2 places this year. Mexico City was the main center of where we were, but then 3 of us, myself, Donner Bartolone, and Brian Pasteur, went down to Palenque, Chiapas. Chiapas is the name of a state in Mexico, way down here, close to the border of Guatemala. Conferences in both of those places. Our home base was the National Presbyterian Church's main seminary in Mexico City, a large campus. These are buildings for dorms and classrooms, and there's more. A nice campus in the heart of Mexico City. Apartment, we had an apartment, 2 apartments, and then some dorm rooms. So we ate all our meals, most of our meals here. Susanna had a meal plan all worked out, a lot of cooking. And places to sleep. Here we're working on pamphlets. We brought a lot of our pamphlets along and made them there, put them together there with help from Office Depot. We probably handed out, I think, over 200 pamphlets while we were there, and they soaked them up. They wanted more. So we'll have to keep doing that. These are pamphlets that Donner has translated into Spanish. Other people have translated some of them previous to that too. All right, so I titled this Discoveries in Mexico. The first discovery is we certainly found a hunger for Reformed truth there. We held 4 conferences during our time there. The first one was at a church, National Presbyterian Church, Jesus the Good Shepherd. This was for office bearers. This was at their request. We gave 4 speeches. The first was a critique of the Kuyperian worldview. They call it reformational philosophy or reformational theology down there, from a book by Gordon Spikeman. So that was the first speech. And then second, a speech on women in church office. Against that, an introduction to the canons of Dort and the Reformed understanding of the sacraments. And all of these were by their request. Some pictures from the speeches. First attempt to go to this conference. We actually ended up at the wrong church. There's about 500 Jesus the Good Shepherd churches in Mexico City, and we picked the wrong one. So we waited out on the street for a while. Nobody came. Finally, we figured out it was at the wrong one, and we had to walk, I don't know what it was, 20 minutes maybe to find the right one. This is Alan and Ellie Vila. Some of you perhaps know them. They came out to the United States for the Synod of Dort conference. This is their parents. Nice church to have a conference at. We had fellowship, cookies and coffee afterwards at every single one. The most controversial subject is the reformational theology, the Kuyperian worldview. They're having a lot of debates about that in these churches out there. And really it was walking into a church that's really splitting over that issue. So it was interesting at times, heated conversation. Common grace comes up in that speech, and there are discussions about that too, so it's a very interesting time. Some more shots from Nick of the city. Pink taxis. Second conference was hosted by the General Assembly of the National Presbyterian Church. This is the big one, big church, 2 million members. As I said, they're kind of splitting over this issue of the Kuyperian, we call it the transformationalist worldview, take over the culture worldview. And so they wanted this speech to be given a number of times. And here at this second conference, they had one man come in and give a speech in favor of that worldview, and then I was to give the speech against that worldview. And we were to speak back to back. That man first on Friday, and then me on Saturday. Here we gave the most detailed, most thorough speech. This is in Mexico City, and people are more educated here. 2 hours each. That man, this is the man who spoke for it. 2 hours straight without translator. I spoke for 2 hours with a translator. Quite detailed, a lot of questions, and some people who are very fired up, one way or the other. Some of them who really did not like what I had to say at all, and others who didn't like what he had to say at all, and it was even tense at times. This is getting ready to start the conference. Every time we traveled somewhere, we piled into an Uber. It's really easy to get Ubers out there. They're safe, reliable. We generally jam 6 people in the back of a car that should only have 2, 3 at the most, but made it work. After the conference, go have some food and relax for a little bit. Go back to the apartment. There's always people hanging out at the apartment on this campus of the Presbyterian Church. Different people staying there from all over the world. This couple is very interesting. Their daughter there and son here. They're from Venezuela. Left Venezuela because it's Venezuela. Because there's no economy there, and it's very difficult even to get food there right now. And he is actually a medical doctor. They came into the United States, actually into Michigan, and he functioned as a doctor for a while on a visa, and was told that he had to go back and then come back in order to keep his visa current. Well, he went back, and they wouldn't let him back in. Apparently a lawyer told him to get the wrong kind of visa or something, so now they're stuck. They ended up in Mexico. He came across the Reformed faith over the internet, and so looked up this Presbyterian church here, and now he works for the kind of campus of the seminary right here while he's waiting to get back, to try to get back to the United States. Prof. Cammy is going to try to pull some strings and see if he can help him get back in the United States. But we had long conversations with him about the Reformed faith. He has some desire to be a minister too, even talked about possibly coming to our seminary. Who knows, that's all up in the air, of course, but very interesting situation. The third conference was held on eschatology. You could tell me what eschatology is. Huh? The end times, I heard it. Good. Eschatology, the last thing. This was at the John Calvin Seminary of the Independent Presbyterian Church, again in Mexico City. Topics: Intro to Reformed Eschatology, the Millennium, Signs of Christ Coming, the Antichrist, the Final Judgment, and Living in the Last Days. You can see the conferences were well attended, very well attended, even better than last year. People were coming up saying how much they appreciated the conference last year, which was on the covenant, and how it just opened so many doors to them, made so many connections for them that they could open up the rest of Scripture by understanding God's covenant better. And they soaked up this conference too. Some more of the attendees here. I don't know if volume is going to come through on this or not. Doesn't seem like it. Are there speakers on this? Does anybody know?
Don't think so.
No? Okay. Well, This is a choir. At the end of the conference, they had a choir sing for us. And none of them speak English, but they learned a song in English just to sing it for us. And it was nice, it was beautiful. God be with you till we meet again. Very good choir. Still at that third conference. This is the main dean of that conference, Professor Custodio. He also came to the United States and attended the PRC Synod of Dort conference that was held at Trinity earlier. I call him Spurgeon because he looks like a Mexican version of Charles Spurgeon. Meals after the conference, good time of fellowship. Back at the apartment again, this is another man who is interested in coming to our seminary. His name is Alex. He speaks fluent English. He's very convicted of the Reformed faith and Protestant Reformed distinctives, the ones that he is aware of. He's an interesting man, a very bright man, intelligent man, educated man. We spent a lot of time talking to him. It's possible, who knows, but it's possible that he would come to our seminary someday. We'll have to see. Kind of told him just to wait, let's get to know each other first, but we'll see about the future. Fourth conference was, again, hosted by the General Assembly of the National Presbyterian Church, and again was on this topic of the Kuyperian worldview transforming the culture. You have to understand that the Christian Reformed Church had a lot of influence among these people in Mexico years ago. Way back in the 50s they did. And they brought this worldview down there and pressed it upon them. And some of them received it and some of them didn't. And it's been festering in their churches up to this day. And now it's kind of bubbling over to the point where there's splits actually happening. There's one classis that is forming just to promote this kind of thinking. Another classis forming to deny that kind of thinking. And we really kind of walked into a denomination that's splitting over this issue. So they wanted this speech to be given also down here in Chiapas, because the main stronghold of Reformed people in Mexico is in Mexico City and in Chiapas. Those two places. There's hundreds of Presbyterian churches down here. Hundreds. So I shortened my speech against this and gave it down here in Palenque, Chiapas. And a different man gave his speech for that theology. 1 hour each this time, plus questions and answers. Flying down to Palenque was an experience. Tiny, tiny airport there. It only has one runway, one gate. Once a flight comes in, that's it for the day. They shut the place down. It's kind of an interesting experience flying into something like that. And then travel by bus into the jungle. It's a heavily jungled area. Jaguars, pythons, interesting place. The conference was held at the Berea Seminary, very small seminary, established by the Presbyterians and the Reformed Church of America back in the day, here in Palenque. It was held outdoors. It's 97 degrees there with 90% humidity. You soak through your clothes in about 20 minutes. So it was quite hot. This seminary is very interesting. It's an institution of the Chol Synod of the National Presbyterian Church. It began in 1958 as a Bible school just for the Chol people. The Chol people are Mayans. You've heard of Aztecs and Mayans, I'm sure. Well, most of those people have been integrated into Mexican society They've married Spanish people when the Spaniards come over. But there are still indigenous groups of Mayans left in Mexico and Aztecs. And this seminary is dedicated to training ministers just for those people who are still 100% Mayans. And among those Mayans, there's different tribes, and the Chol is one of those tribes of Mayans. They've never married outside of that indigenous group. They're basically like the Native Americans in the United States. And they maintain their language, and the Word of God has come into them, into their group, and especially this seminary has trained ministers for that group of people. And there is a video here that you can't hear, but you can see that the seminary is very basic, just basic rooms. Piece of property with a few buildings on it. And then this here is a dorm room that students studying for the ministry stay in. Sleep on that, put their clothes in that, and it's very, very basic living. Here is the conference. This is after the conference. No audio again, but very well attended. A lot of interesting questions. This man who spoke against me or whatever, against my position here in Chiapas, resorted to some interesting tactics. The guy in Mexico City was very intelligent. It was a nice time because we could interact with each other. He had a very organized speech. But this guy, he just came out angry. Angry that I was there, angry that I had been invited to speak against reformational thought. So he just went up and it was just a bluster of, he accused me of lying. He said all my quotes that I had from Doyavir and anybody else were all lies. They didn't really say those things. And then he said, and then this American comes over here and violently attacks us, and it was kind of strange. But anyway, at the end of it, it certainly seemed like the crowd was more in favor of what we were promoting than what he was. I think they felt a bit threatened, but we'll see what the Lord does. Preaching, we preached on both Sundays in various churches, the National Presbyterian Church and the Independent Presbyterian Church. Preaching is always well received when we're down there. This is a church in Mexico City. This is a church in the hills surrounding Mexico City, Reverend Klein. Kendra was at this church with Reverend Klein. Had a nice time there. Fairly large congregation. I didn't put the picture in there of Kendra standing on the, what was that, a chair or something?
Yes, I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah, she's taller than everybody anyways, but then they wanted her to stand on a chair and get a picture, so she was like 10 feet tall and we were down here. More preaching on Sunday. Another small church in Mexico City. Reverend Klein preached at a church out in the country. This is the church right here. It was an interesting experience. He preached there last year too, and then ate the food they gave him afterwards and ended up in the hospital. So he was a little more careful this time. So discoveries. That was the first discovery, that there is a hunger for Reformed truth and the Reformed truth that we bring to them. The second discovery was there are doctrinal issues and doctrinal divisions there. As I've been pointing out, the National Presbyterian Church is divided over reformational thought. Very divided. Big issue right now for them. We'll have to see how that comes down in God's providence. The Independent Presbyterian Church embraces Reformational thought as a whole, and we're still getting to know what they mean by it, but it's definitely has a root there. The National Presbyterian Church has some influence of Pentecostalism in its outlying areas where there's ministers who aren't very well trained. They pull sermons off the internet from anywhere because they're not trained, and that's how false doctrine comes in. But in the main areas where these churches are, they're pretty solid. The National Presbyterian Church took a decision to not ordain women into office ever, into all three of the offices, pastor, elder, or deacon. However, they are so short of ministers. There's thousands of churches without ministers. They have had the problem of some women who will come up and sort of give a lay sermon at times. And that needs to be discussed. Third discovery is that Madeline Monsma likes grasshoppers and ant larvae. These are all fried grasshoppers on a little tortilla called a sope. Tortilla, guacamole, and fried grasshoppers. She ate all three of these things. Am I right? She ate all three of these. They're really not bad. They're very salty. Pretty good. I didn't get a picture of the ant larva, but that wasn't bad either. Fourth discovery for us this time was this whole section of Presbyterianism down in Chiapas, down at that very southern part of Mexico. I thought I had the map back up, but I don't. You remember way down south by the border of Guatemala. That's what I'm talking about now. Very conservative Presbyterians down there with these native groups of Mayans that I was talking to you about before. Indigenous Mayan people. Presbyterianism came down here in 1905. It was the RCA, the Reformed Church of America, that really helped them, sent missionaries down beginning in 1925. And the RCA has been down there up until 8 years ago. 8 years ago they pulled out, which is good because the RCA is liberal. But they did some pretty astounding work from back in the day down here in the southern part of Mexico. For 40 years, so from about 1905 through the 40s, 50s, these people were heavily persecuted. The Spanish came into Mexico in the 1500s and brought Roman Catholicism and really set up a system of government, even local government, that was really backed by the Roman Catholic Church. So anything other than Roman Catholicism was a threat to the Roman Catholic Church and their power over that area. Well, when the gospel came in and God started drawing people to himself, the Roman Catholic Church responded, as they generally do, by persecution. Horrible persecution. 30,000 of these people were removed from off their land, was stolen from them. They were told they just had to go find somewhere else. They went and lived in the jungles. Thousands of them were killed for the sake of the Reformed faith. I was reading a story about one woman who the Lord took to himself, and she had 2 nieces and 1 nephew living with her because their parents had died. And the Roman Catholic authorities found out that she had become Presbyterian, and during the night they showed up with a shotgun and banged down the door And she instinctively ran through another door, the back door of a tiny little cement house. And the guy got a shot off and shot her in the back. She fell out the door into a ditch and went unconscious. It was dark out. They thought they had killed her. She didn't die. She woke up a couple hours later and dragged herself over to somebody else's house that she knew was a believer too. And they helped her, got her wrapped up, and then she said, the children. And so they went back into the house, and those guys had decapitated one of the boys. They had chopped the arms and the legs off of one of the girls, left her like that, and they poured gasoline over the other boy or girl, I can't remember, and lit him on fire, killed him. And then they proclaimed, if anyone here confesses Christ this way and reads the Bible, and that's always the issue, reads the Bible, this is going to happen to you too. And they did it. They killed thousands of people for the sake of Christ. One newspaper reporter interviewed them and said, why are you doing this to these people? And the response was, because they don't abide by our culture. They don't drink alcohol until they're drunk like we do. They read their Bible and they pray a lot, and they're not like us. And they won't worship the idols of Mary that we worship. So we're going to kill them until they stop. Quite a sobering thing then to fly into this group of people and to be with them who have suffered so much for the cause of Jesus Christ. Despite the persecution, and really because of it, the faith spread down there. In the neighboring state, there's 300 Presbyterian churches. Chiapas, where we were, there's hundreds of them. There's 87 Presbyterian churches just among that one Mayan Chol tribe that speaks its own language. They only have 24 ministers, and that's the point of this Griess seminary, to train these men to go into these churches in this indigenous tribe. Donner Bartolome, who's going to our seminary, is Mayan. He grew up here in Chiapas. He's from one of these tribes. And for himself, this is a very sobering experience. This is the first time he was back here since he was 9 years old. His people were persecuted for the sake of Christ. And for him to come back and to see this and to be an influence on them was a pretty big deal. The most exciting thing for me of this whole trip was while we were down here in Chiapas with these indigenous tribes, there was an impromptu worship service. We weren't able to stay over a Sunday because there's only 2 flights that go in and out of this area per week, one on Wednesday and one on Saturday. And we had to leave on Monday, so we couldn't stay over a Sunday. But about 2 hours after we flew in here, one of the pastors, who also teaches at that little Berea seminary, he just said, hey, do you want to preach tonight? I said, sure. He goes, all right, let's go. So we got in a van and we drove up into the hills. This is back into the jungle hills of the mountains of Chiapas. 1.5-hour drive. After an hour, you get off any semblance of a road, and you're going through, I guess it's a road, but it doesn't seem like a road. It's just, you have to go 2 miles an hour to get anywhere. And then finally it opens up into this village in the midst of a jungle. And these people, these Chol people, they still speak Chol. This man speaks Chol, this pastor. The donations from down in the city, they had a cement building for a church, nice building. 250 Chol people come to this church. He pulls up. This is not planned. None of this has been planned. He gets on a loudspeaker that he has set up at the church, And he just announces, we're going to have a worship service right now. And he keeps talking for a while, and people slowly start coming out of the fields, coming out of their houses, until there was somewhere between 150, 200 people who show up in church, and got to preach for him that night. It was quite a wonderful experience. This is the church. We don't really have any pictures of the village, unfortunately, but they're all subsistence farmers. They live off the land. They don't get anything from the city, nothing. It's just they eat what they grow. This is, they sing to get it. That's part of how they get everybody to come in. They just start singing, and then people show up. Fifth discovery. The country's cultural heritage, out of which God's people were drawn. Striking thing. We had some time to visit some of the ancient ruins of the civilizations that were here. Teotihuacan is an ancient city outside of Mexico City. It was not built by the Aztecs, but the Aztecs took it over eventually. It was built about 200 BC by the Olmec tribe, probably. A lot of temples. You can see this pyramid back here, and we're actually on a pyramid right here. All these little things you see set up here, these pyramid type of things, they're all altars to idol gods. And the sacrifices that they made were people about the age of my daughter sitting right here in the corner. They would stab them in the heart and offer child sacrifices to their gods. Along this road, when they excavated it, they found thousands upon thousands of skulls of little children from all the sacrifices, child sacrifices that were made. So this is outside of Mexico City. This is the Mayan ruins in Chiapas, down south where those Mayan tribes were. And again, child sacrifice. Can't see it very well, but right here there's a circle stone table where they would lay the child on that table, take a knife, open up the chest, rip out the heart, bring the heart up these stairs, and offer it up to their idol god there at the top of the pyramid. Horribly violent pagan religion. Donner is again from here. 4 generations ago, his people would have been Mayan, idol worshiping. Probably 3 generations ago, they would have been Roman Catholic. 2 generations ago, Presbyterian. This is inside, not this particular pyramid, but one of these pyramids down in Chiapas. They found the tomb of the greatest king of the Mayans, whose name is Pakal. This tomb is massive. This is a replica of it. It's still down in that pyramid. They can't get it out because it's too big to get out. They would have to destroy the pyramid itself in order to get it out. They built the tomb first and then the pyramid around the tomb. The lid of this thing weighs 400 tons, pure stone. They opened it up in the 1950s and found the skeletal remains of this great Mayan king, Pakal, and this beautiful jade mask and jade jewels that were all in there with him, and a number of servants that they had killed and put in there with him for the afterlife. But the most interesting thing about this tomb to Pakal is the carvings that are on the top of his tomb. Here is a representation of what's carved on the top of it. Does anybody notice anything about this carving that strikes you as interesting?
Cross.
Yes. Right here. There was a story that developed among the Mayans that there was a tree in the shape of a cross that was the center of the universe. The Mayans came into Mexico about 600 AD, 600 after Christ. The Spanish came about 1500. Before, the Mayans and the Aztecs were about the same, 600 to 1300. They arose. Before that, there were the Mesoamerican tribes, the Olmec and other tribes that are like the Native Americans in the United States. And these Mayans and the Aztecs, they don't look like the other tribes. They actually look more Asian than anything else. A lot of people think that they actually came in, emigrated into Mexico later. Is it possible that they heard and corrupted something of the story of Christ and the cross? I don't know. I have no idea. It's possible it's 600 AD, but in any event, there it is on the tomb of the cult. Sixth discovery is that there are a lot of God-given opportunities for the Protestant Reformed churches here, if we desire them. There's opportunities for publishing. The National Presbyterian Church, this is a 2 million Presbyterian church, requested that we help them publish in Spanish the RFPA book, The 16th Century Reformation of the Church. Through their publishing arm there, they want to spread it out to all of their people throughout Mexico. They also asked the PRC to help them publish our sermons. They want our sermons. When we preach, they're astounded. They're astounded at the content, at the logic. They keep saying, we can't believe how clear this is. And they want this to be spread through their people, and they want their ministers to be able to see these examples of preaching. So we had a long meeting with them about that and kind of came up with a plan that Reformed Witness Hour sermons would probably be the best way to start. And so we hope to help them publish our Reformed Witness Hour sermons. We're going to put an outline in them so that the ministers can see how we outline things and publish them throughout all their churches in Mexico. They've requested more conferences than we can do. We had a request to give a conference for an entire synod in Chiapas, a request to give a conference for 300 churches in Tabasco. We had a request to give conferences on Christian education for the National Presbyterian Church. Every time we speak down there, we emphasize confessionally reformed schools because they don't have very many there. And they are picking up on that and want us to help them with that. We had a request to come back to John Calvin Seminary to give conferences. We had a request to give conferences on the importance of sound Reformed seminary training. We had a request to give conferences on Reformed expository preaching. And this one we were not asked about, but we really want to give a conference on the topic of common grace. It's come up a number of times, been debated a bit. We'd like to give a conference on that next year, Lord willing. Christian schools. We had a request to help start a confessionally reformed school in Tabasco. They have property, they have a building. They want help with curriculum and things like that. We had a request from the leaders of the MPC to help them establish structure and curriculum for reformed schools through their denomination. They recognize that this is strength of the PRC, and they're looking for help in this area. Which leads to the seventh discovery, and that is that we need more help. We need translators, we need Spanish speakers, we need our material to be translated into Spanish. Donner goes into seminary this coming semester. He's going to have to dedicate himself to the work of the seminary. He's been translating things left and right for us. He's not going to be able to do that for the next number of years. We need Spanish speakers, people who can translate our things into Spanish, even the things that are on our Federation website for our schools. The course by Prof. Dykstra, things for teachers, and all of that stuff, all of our pamphlets. There's so much, they soak it up, they want it, they need it. So if anybody of you young people is thinking about pursuing Spanish, it will not go to waste, that's for sure. Obviously, whoops. I assume that was for me, not obviously, we have a lack of teachers. We need teachers in our own schools. And that should be a priority. We need teachers in our own schools. If God provides it, we could use teachers who can speak Spanish, who could go down and help them possibly as well. We need your prayers. We need more men to go down and teach and preach, if the Lord provides that. Reverend Klein and I were talking to each other the other day and saying that we could send all of our Protestant Reformed ministers down there for 2 weeks in the summer, and they would be busy giving conferences and teaching and preaching. So do what we can, of course, make a start, and if the Lord closes the door, fine, but to this point, He's kept it open, and so we'll keep going. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful